Okay, for my presentation I'll be talking largely about the implications of GDP growth for population, and I'll be talking about the fact that we have to, especially the wealthy nations of the world, are going to have to, and in fact it will be desirable for them to reduce their GDP growth, not only for their own benefit, for also the benefit of the poorer nations of the world. And I'll just start by talking about the fact that firstly, if we're talking about the relationship between the economy and the Earth, let's look at the Earth first. The Earth is a steady state system. It's finite and it's not physically growing. Essentially, the inflow of energy is equal to the outflow. Material inflows and outflows are negligible. But although the Earth is a physical steady state, there's considerable qualitative change that can take place on Earth. And of course, one of the most critical forms of change on Earth in recent times has been the growth of the economic subsystem and the human population within it. Now, I'll just go on to this particular diagram here. This is a very basic one that shows the relationship between the economy and the ecosphere. The economy, of course, is a subsystem of the ecosphere, and essentially it relies upon economic activity, the input of resources, and of course, which is needed for production purposes to produce our goods and services. And of course, once they're consumed, they exit the economy back to the natural environment as waste. This is sometimes referred to as the throughput, which is required to produce and maintain the physical wealth that makes up the economy. If I just go back, so we've got a situation where if this thing called the economy is growing relative to the finite natural environment within which it exists, then effectively the throughput, the resources in and the waste out must increase over time. Now, it is possible as the economy grows to reduce that rate of throughput through technological progress, but it's only short-lived. There are thermodynamic limits to increases in efficiency, so it means that efficiency increasing technological progress suffers from diminishing returns. If we get to a point where the rate of technological progress in percentage terms is less than the rate of growth of the economy, then in order for the economy to grow, the throughput must increase. Basically, for the economy to be sustainable in the long run, there are two basic, there's many rules, these are just two basic rules that must be adhered to. That is, the resource flow must be less than or equal to the rate of regeneration, and the waste output must be less than or equal to the rate of waste assimilation. So continued growth of the economy, which requires this increase in throughput over time, the increase in resource inputs and waste output, must be unsustainable in the long run because one and eventually both of these rules are violated. They must be violated if we continue to grow the economy. So the conclusion that we can draw from that is that provided the economy is small relative to the steady state ecosphere, and by that I mean a world which is what we might call an empty world with few human-made objects and few human beings, the economy can safely and desirably grow. So if the economy is small relative to the non-growing ecosphere, growth for a period of time is possible and it can be desirable. But of course, as the economy becomes large relative to the steady state ecosphere, and there I'm talking about a full world with many human-made objects and many human beings, the economy must conform to the physical behavioural mode of the Earth in order to remain sustainable. That is, it must conform to the physical steady state. So the larger the economy gets relative to the ecosphere, the more the economy must conform to the physical steady state of the ecosphere upon which it depends. So essentially what we need to do is we need to initiate a transition from a growth economy to a steady state economy. And of course by this I'm including a steady state or non-growing population. Okay, I pointed out the fact that if the economy is small relative to the ecosphere, then it can grow for a period of time and it can be desirable. And then when the economy becomes large relative to the ecosphere, then it becomes time to make the transition to a steady state economy. When do we know when it's a good time to make this transition? I'm going to talk about two limits to growth. I'm going to talk about an ecological limit to growth and another thing called an economic limit to growth. Two other indicators apart from oil and climate change that John didn't refer to that I'll actually talk about is one of them is called an ecological footprint. And basically the ecological footprint measures the area of land required to provide resources and assimilate waste. Then there's another indicator called the biocapacity, either of a nation or the earth as a whole, which is the area of land that's available to provide resources and assimilate waste. Now, of course, if the ecological footprint is greater than the biocapacity, then effectively we've exceeded the ecological limit to growth. We've got an ecological deficit. And as at 2005, the global ecological footprint was greater than the global biocapacity. In fact, by a factor of 0.3 or 30%. So effectively, this might sound a bit strange, we were basically consuming 1.3 planets. Now you might say that's impossible, we've only got one planet. What that basically means is that in order to consume the equivalent to 1.3 planets, it means that we're eating into the stock of natural capital. In other words, if we were, as at 2005, to maintain our level of consumption globally at that level, in order for that to be sustained in the long run, we need 1.3 Earths. We've only got one. And this is sort of represented by this figure. And we were using about half a planet. We went into ecological deficit in the mid-1980s, and we've now got into a situation where we've got an ecological deficit. Sorry, we had an ecological balance in the mid-80s, and now we're in an ecological deficit. So, at the very least, from a global perspective, we must reduce the scale of the global economy and the population of human beings to an ecologically balanced budget position, where the ecological footprint is equal to the biocapacity. In fact, I would actually go further and argue that we need to reduce it a little bit more than that, just for precautionary reasons. But we might then ask the question, well, should we operate the economy at the maximum sustainable scale of the global economy? That is where ecological footprint equals biocapacity. In other words, should we sort of operate the global economy sort of around the scale that led to an ecological balance as it was in the mid-1980s? Well, I'd say no. I've sort of mentioned one reason why, and that's for precautionary reasons. We should perhaps operate where the global footprint divided by the biocapacity is no more than, say, 0.9. Well, I've just plucked a number out there. Maybe it should be lower than that. But at least it has to be something less for precautionary reasons. You don't want to be right on the ecological precipice. I'd also argue that there's a good economic reason to operate well short of the maximum sustainable scale, or what I sometimes refer to as the economic limit to growth. And basically the reason for this is that as the economy grows, there are various benefits and there are various costs. Effectively, the production and consumption benefits of growing the economy increase at a diminishing rate. And this is called in economics the principle of diminishing marginal benefits. So it's not a controversial term. It's a term that you'll find in any undergraduate economics textbook at first year level. Basically it means that as we produce and consume more goods, we get additional benefit, but the extra benefit that we get as we produce and consume more goods diminishes over time. That doesn't mean that our benefits don't go up, they just go up at a diminishing rate. Of course, there are social and ecological costs associated with growing the economy, and these tend to increase at an increasing rate. And this is called in economics the principle of increasing marginal costs. So here you've got a situation where social and ecological costs not only increase, they increase at an increasing rate. So we might have a situation that looks like something like this. So if on the horizontal axis, this represents the physical scale of the economy. So if we're moving in this direction to the right, it would be equivalent to my earlier diagram of the economy getting bigger. And we might measure benefits and costs on the vertical axis. Well, the benefits tend to go up at a diminishing rate, whereas the costs, well, it's possible to have a bit of diminishing or increasing returns to begin with, but eventually the costs are governed by the principle of increasing marginal costs. So costs go up at an increasing rate. I've got the cost curve vertical at this particular scale here. That's SS, the maximum sustainable scale. That scale there would be where effectively ecological footprint is equal to biocapacity.